Excellencies and distinguished speakers, on behalf of Cosmos Foundation, I welcome you to today's webinar on Bangladesh-South Korea relations, Prognosis for the Future. I'll now run through the program itinerary for today's event, which will be recorded today and broadcast at a later date on our media partner United News of Bangladesh's channels, details of which will be shared with all of you. Today, we will commence with welcome remarks by Mr. Inayatullah Khan, Chairman of Cosmos Foundation, who will then hand it over to our Chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, to deliver his remarks. The keynote address will be delivered by His Excellency Lee Jang-kyun, Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Bangladesh, followed by our 5 distinguished discussants who will each speak for a duration of 10 minutes. We'll begin with Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, Mr. Kihak Sung, Dr. Rubana Haq, Ambassador Iftikhar al-Karim, and Mr. Shafkat Munir. I would also like to take this opportunity to list a few housekeeping rules. Kindly keep your microphone on mute when not deliberating to avoid sound interruptions. Please keep your video on throughout the webinar, and we also request you to be mindful of the time during your deliberation. Thank you, and we very much look forward to the discussions today. I will now hand it over to Mr. Inayatullah Khan to commence our session. Thank you.
A very good morning. It gives us great joy to welcome Ambassador Lee Jang-kyun of the Republic of Korea as our keynote speaker today. We have been thinking of hosting this event for quite some time, but I'm happy that today we are able to host it. And the title of the event is Bangladesh-Korea Relationship, Prognosis for Future. And I'm very happy that we have been able to gather a brilliant panel of discussants. And I'm sure that today's deliberation will give many answers to many of the questions that many of us have in our mind. Especially, I would be reflecting on one of my experiences back in 1985 in Seoul. But before that, I would like to say that this is a very happy moment to host this event because we are about to host 50 years of our bilateral relationship, and I think recently Ambassador Lee had an interview with our news agency UNB, which I noted with pleasure that he said that Bangladesh-Korea relationship looks bright and will grow even brighter. So on this note, I would hope that our relationship will grow deeper and wider, and we will enjoy a very, I would say, strategic partnership relationship between Bangladesh and Korea. One of the cornerstones of Bangladesh-Korea relationship, in fact, till now, has been the Young One Corporation, probably the most important foreign company in Bangladesh, success story for over 4 decades now. They are the largest foreign investor in Bangladesh's R&D sector. Among other things, I think our private sector, high-tech park, and ICT hub will also be there. Besides this, I hear Samsung has created a research and development division in Bangladesh that would employ a significant number of local engineers. This makes a very noteworthy contribution in terms of technology transfer. I think technology transfer is a very critical element in the development of any nation, and Korea is a bright and a burning example to the whole world that how critical it is to have technology and technological capability to acquire. There has been, I think our trade volume is now almost close to 2 billion. It's over 1.6 billion. I hope it will touch 2 billion soon. Our economic and commercial collaboration has also advanced. The KOICA, the Korean International Cooperation Agency, has been rendering a human service by playing a major role startup incubation training programs have been a remarkable innovation. Interestingly, unlike many other Bangladeshi labor destinations, Korea has been hosting a significant Bangladeshi skill force. The numbers I understand are around 20,000 plus and rising. So this has also resulted in considerable inflow of remittances. There is also a large student force, and agreements between universities are being reached. This intellectual collaboration is, I believe, is very significant in deepening our understanding, has also resulted in many cultural interactions. Many may be aware of the Korean film Andhadhun, which is written, produced, and directed in Korea with Bangladeshi lead players. This is something more than what we have achieved in terms of people-to-people collaboration with many of our partners and friends. Before I close my opening remarks, I wanted to reflect on one of my very personal experiences in 1985 when I was a member of the presidential entourage, and I was a member. That was the first private sector delegation, and I was the youngest member of the delegation. And we, among many other things, we had visited a Samsung, not a white good factory, but a suit. It was semi-automated suit factory. And I asked what was the export of that Samsung outfit. And a Korean gentleman replied that it is about $400 million from that Samsung outlet, that factory. And I knew that in 1960, the erstwhile East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh, we were exporting jute, and our export earning from that single product was more than the total export earning of Korea. And I said that in 25 years, what has gone wrong? That today, our total country's export is less than the factory that I'm standing in Seoul, is outskirts of Seoul maybe. So I think in today's deliberation, some of these questions, why it happened and how it happened, I guess we will try to explore and probe. On that note, I would like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry. Everybody, he doesn't need any introduction. The former Foreign Affairs advisor during the immediate past caretaker government, and we are very fortunate to have him as the president of our foundation, Cosmos Foundation. Over to Dr. Chaudhry to conduct the rest of the proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Naya. Thank you very much. I hope you all in Dhaka are having as lovely a morning as we are here in Singapore. It's a lovely, lovely day, and thank you all for joining us. Now, Korea is a remarkable country in terms of its achievements. It's a nation whose GNI increased per capita from US $67, I think in the early 1950s, to US 33,390 in 2019. Now the GDP growth, and it's still growing, its deftly crafted policy packages resulted in the most impressive GDP growth, averaging about 5.45% annually between 1988 and 2009. It's fueled by annual export growth, averaging 9.27%. Now, as in the flying geese paradigm in economic perceptions, and you know this is when there is a lead goose and all the birds follow that the leader. Korea has been the lead bird in the region, and its model is supremely worthy of emulation by others. Now, its global role has been concomitant with its economic rise. One example was the leadership at the United Nations provided by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, which I have personally witnessed. Bilateral relations between Korea and Bangladesh, of course, have grown by leaps and bounds. They have been mutually most rewarding and have the potentials to be even more so. Our ties are a good example how shared values can effectively drive positive collaboration between two nations. Korean support has been crucial to Bangladesh's achievements. At a personal level, I've enjoyed very close cooperation with many Korean personalities. I can say, albeit with deep humility, that I had earlier championed the case of the Korean SEZ when the process was going through some delay. I recall my visit to Seoul in June 2007 when I forged a very close rapport with my counterpart, Foreign Minister Song Min-soo. Since I also held the additional portfolio of expatriate Bangladeshis, this was the MOU we signed on June, opening up the skilled labor market. And as you've heard, that this is different from the kind of market we have in the Middle East for our labor. So I hope that this is something that we focus on and we profit enormously from this. It was also during that visit that I recall meeting with Chairman Ki Hak-sang of Yangon. First, when he came to see me, I think with my good friend Ambassador Sun Jung-young, then and at a splendid lunch at the traditional octagonal pavilion at the Korea House. I would like to state unequivocally that he's a true friend of Bangladesh and applaud his enormous contribution to Bangladesh economy. Ambassador Lee, I have not had the occasion to substantively interact with you as yet, but I'm aware of your manifold professional qualities. I commend your relentless efforts to strengthen the bilateral ties between Bangladesh and Korea. Now, with these few words, I'll cut to the chase. I will begin by offering the floor to Ambassador Lee for his keynote address. Ambassador Lee, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, Shubho Shokal and Assalamu alaikum Shubai. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere and deep appreciation to Cosmo Foundation, in particular through Chairman Enatullah Khan and also President Iftekhar Ahmed Choudhury for providing me and us with this very precious opportunity to think about and to talk about Korea-Bangladesh relations. Already we hear very interesting story from our two previous speakers about our relations. It's somewhat exciting for me to hear more of your experience regarding Korea-Bangladesh relations during this session. And also I have to not to omit my appreciation to Mr. Mohan Din, UNBC reporter with whom I have almost daily contact and very close cooperation in facilitating and also strengthening the relations between us. I understood through him that there are huge expectations among the media and also reporters on our relations. And also I'd like to express my special thank to all the speakers for today's discussion. Dr. Devapriya Bhattacharya and Ambassador Iftekhar Karim. And I understand Dr. Devapriya will soon travel to Korea for participating in one of the important international meeting there. And even though I have not met Ambassador Karim yet, but he sent such a warm message to my embassy for several times, and also gave me very encouraging comments and also wishes for further strengthening of relations during my time here. And it's my great pleasure to see you all in this cyberspace, and also thank you for your contribution to today's discussion. Today, I'd like to make a presentation, not a typical speech or statements, and I'd like to make a presentation on overall situation of Korea-Bangladesh relations. And I decide this because I realized that not many people have a full or correct understanding of our bilateral relations. And many know that Korea and Bangladesh have a very strong and close ties, but I realized that very few know about the details of our relations. And I believe that having a correct and detailed understanding or knowledge about the relations is important in developing and strengthening our relations toward the future. Today's seminar's title is the prognosis for the future. If we can have a correct prognosis for the future, we have to have correct understanding of today's bilateral relations. And today's bilateral relations comes from the past, from the very beginning of our relations. So I made some PowerPoint presentation to share with you, and through this I will speak. Let me share. Can you see this?
We can, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So first, even though everybody knows, I'd like to start how our relations started in the beginning. Here, I'd like to share with you a few interesting historical facts that I found during my search for diplomatic archive on the beginning of our relations. The photo on the right side you see is a letter from Korean Foreign Minister in 1972, May 12, to his counterpart of Bangladesh Foreign Minister, informing him about Korea's recognition of independent Bangladesh. This is signed by the minister and sent to our embassy in New Delhi and to Bangladesh representative in New Delhi. And this is the very historical document I found during my research. As was mentioned, Korea recognized Bangladesh in May 1972, but it is more than 1 year after that we established full diplomatic ties. We first established consular ties September 93 and established diplomatic ties December 93. And Korea opened our embassy in Dhaka in 1975, and Bangladesh opened its embassy in Seoul in 1987. And this is some interesting documents I found. This is about Ban Ki-moon. President Khan also talked about Ban Ki-moon's interesting role in the bilateral relations. But this is one of the documents Ban Ki-moon drafted when he was in the Foreign Service office. Ban Ki-moon joined the Foreign Ministry, Foreign Service in 1970. And the first office he was assigned was the office in charge of this region, including Pakistan, India, and at the time, this East Pakistan. And this document drafted by Ban Ki-moon is about is instructing Korean embassy in New Delhi to inform our recognition to Bangladesh new government. And in the red circle is the name of the Ban Ki-moon, and it was signed by the then minister. And this was all coordinated among the government, including Prime Minister, and also reported to the President. And there are many documents drafted by Ban Ki-moon as a desk officer in charge of Bangladesh at the time. And I shared this document also together with the official letter of the Foreign Minister to the Foreign Minister Moment a few months ago. And this is also another photo I found. When I arrived here, it was very historic year for Bangladesh, celebrating centenary of the first of Bangabandhu, and this year is going to be the year of the independence. But I was very wondered why there was no photo of any Korean leaders with Bangabandhu. So I was very curious, and I made it my effort to find some clue or something. And finally, I found this photo. This is a photo between Bangabandhu and former Ban Ki-moon's boss. This gentleman is Ambassador Roh Shin-young of the Korean ambassador to New Delhi. And he came to Dhaka and met with Bangabandhu in 1973, and they discussed about the terms of the diplomatic ties between our two governments. It has taken Bangabandhu's residence. And interesting thing is that, this Ambassador Ro Shin-young was not only the boss of Mr. Ban Ki-moon, but also later he became a Korean foreign minister, and then he became a Korean prime minister later. So actually, this is some photo between Bangabandhu and Korean prime minister in 1970s. So this is very rare photo I found, and I think it's a very interesting and meaningful historic documents. And that might be the reason why Ban Ki-moon has so much personal affection to Bangladesh and also to the development of our bilateral relations. And the photo on the left side is Ban Ki-moon's remark on Bangabandhu. He mentioned Bangabandhu as someone far ahead of his time. And this kind of historical connection of Mr. Ban Ki-moon with this country, I believe it is a true diplomatic asset, not only for myself, but also for Bangladesh government to fully utilize for the further deepening of our relations. And this is also another photo I found during my research. And this photo looks like meeting between Bangabandhu and some Asian people. And I thought that this photo might be someone from Korea. And I asked my colleague to search for the newspaper archives, and I found that this was the Korean presidential envoy to send to Bangladesh to discuss important things between our two countries. And the date of this meeting was just one day before a tragic day when Bangabandhu was murdered. So this newspaper came out on 15th of August, 1975. And I noticed this date because, as you see on the right, Bangabandhu visits Dhaka University today, party from India. So Bangabandhu was murdered on the very morning that was supposed to visit Dhaka University. But this newspaper came out without knowing that Bangabandhu was murdered. But on the very front page, it carried a story and photo of Bangabandhu and Korean delegation, Korean special envoy. And if you see on the left side, you can see that this Korean delegation spoke very highly of Bangabandhu's leadership in leading this country. There was also an article in this meeting, and it was just a night before the Bangabandhu's murder. So this is also one very interesting history in our relations, and which I found. And next thing I would like to share with you is about the beginning of our relations. It's about Korea's role in Bangladesh's R&D industry development. And already my previous speaker shared their thought about the role of R&D, but this is very well-known story. And also I very often hear from my Bangladesh friends and colleagues. And this photo, what you see in this slide, is the photo of Fresh Garments and its founder, and the late Nurul Kader, who is regarded as the father of Bangladesh's garments industry. And this is something I found from the World Bank Dhaka Office report, which came out in 1988. And according to this report, you see this graph, Bangladesh's garment exports in 1981 was only 0.5% of total Bangladesh's exports. But it grew so fast, and in 6 years, by 1987, the proportion increased up to almost 30%, 28.2%. And showing this graph, World Bank introduced the role of Korean companies in the development of Bangladesh's R&D sector. And the story, as you see, Mr. Nur Kader formed Dutch government in July 1978. And he made an special arrangement with Peru Corporation for machinery purpose and training and marketing for the R&D production. And May 1979, after 1 year, 130 managers, supervisors, and technicians and workers were sent to Peru's main garment factory in Korea, in Busan, and they were there and trained by Peru for 6 months. And after 6 months, they came back and they established a full production facility. Here, I understand it was in Chicago. And from April 1980, fish started production, and especially for exclusively for exports, with 450 machines from there, and with 500 workers. And the bottom in the blue letter you see is the observation of the World Bank that all those 130 Bangladeshis trained in Korea spawned hundreds of exporting firms, and that was the start of Bangladesh's R&D industry. And now this R&D industry is the largest manufacturing industry in Bangladesh, and accounts for more than 80% of Bangladesh's total exports. So we have a very success story in our relations in the R&D sector. And I intentionally brought this to raise your attention and awareness of the success story between us in the past, and also the success story is still going on, as we see from the chairman of Yangon Corporation, Chairman Song Hart. And I'd like to talk about the FDI. As you know, that Korea is number 5th in terms of accumulated total amount of investment to this country after the United States, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Singapore. Then is Korea. Total accumulated amount is $1.2 billion. And out of this the total investment, the interesting thing is that the majority of Korean investment up to now here in this country is in the textile and R&D related sector. If you include textile and leather related investment by Korean companies here, it accounts for almost 80% of Korea's investments to this country. If you see the United States investment, you see that the US investment is mainly in energy sector, gas and petroleum. And in case of United Kingdom, we see that the majority of UK's investment in this country is in banking, financing sector. And Korea is mainly in manufacturing sector and still largely in the R&D environment related field. And on the left side, this is the statistics from the PEPSA that Korea is the number 1 foreign country investing in EPZs after Bangladesh. So there are 72 Korean companies operating in Bangladesh EPZs across the country, especially in Dhaka and in Chattogram. And there are 2 Korean companies also in Manila EPZ now. And Youngwon, I think as Chairman Song is with us today, I will not explain details about Youngwon's role in the R&D sector or in the general investment of Korea's the Korean companies in this country. I will speak and I will leave all these stories to Chairman Song. But I would like to emphasize that KPZ, started by Youngwon Corporation more than 20 years ago, was another shining example of the success story of Korea and Bangladesh cooperation. And we are building up these success stories, and these success stories will be the very important foundation for us to take our country's relations into new heights into the future. And now I'd like to discuss about the trade relations. First of all, I'd like to draw your attention that Korea is expanding duty and duty-free access to more than 95% of Bangladesh's products since 2008. And if you see the trade figure, bilateral trade volume, it reached $1 billion in 2008 and peaked in 2011 with almost $2 billion. But interestingly, strangely, the trade volume has not been increased during the past 10 years. You see the graph. On the top is the Korea's export to Bangladesh, and on the bottom is Bangladesh's export to Korea. And in the middle, the red figure is the trade gap, the surplus by Korean exports to this country. So even if you see this graph, even the trade volume was decreased in 2019 and 2020. And considering the increase of Bangladesh's overall trade volume more than double and almost triple during the past 10 years, in real terms, our bilateral trade volume has been significantly decreased in some sense. And one encouraging thing is that the trade is picking up slowly this year, and by the end of this year, already our trade volume, both Korea's export to Bangladesh and Bangladesh's export to Korea, already passed the volume of last year, and this is encouraging sign. And as you see, Korea ranks 11th in Bangladesh's imports, now accounting for 2.3% of Bangladesh's total imports. In Bangladesh's exports, it is obvious that Korea is not Bangladesh's major export destination. These countries are major destination of Bangladesh's exports, but there is no name you can find in this list. So this is another graph I made my own research. In understanding the current situation of our bilateral trade, it might be useful to compare the trend of other countries. And I looked up Bangladesh's trade with China and compared it with Korea. And you can see Bangladesh's exports, China and Korea for the past 10 years in the graph on the left. And Bangladesh's export to both China and Korea have been more than doubled during the past 10 years. This red graph is Bangladesh's export to China. So from 319 million US dollars, it reached to $680 million. It's more than doubled. And sometimes it has been tripled in 2016. But in terms of Bangladesh's export to Korea, it has been increasing steadily, and from $163 million in 2010 reached almost $400 million in 2020. And imports by Bangladesh, you can see this is import by Bangladesh, but export by China and Korea. So Chinese export to Bangladesh has been almost tripled during the past 10 years, from $59 billion, almost $60 billion 10 years ago. It's now $120 billion or $130 billion. So there was significant increase in China's export to Bangladesh. But as I explained, Korea's export to Bangladesh, if you see that during the past 10 years, it remained the same level or even somewhat decreased. So this is very strange phenomena and strange effects. And if you compare this proportion of Korea's export imports in general export import of Bangladesh, like in case of China, Bangladesh export to China increased from 1.4% of total trade volume to 1.8% for the 10 years, and Korea also increased, not significantly, but increased from 0.7% to 1%. This is the portion of Bangladesh's export to Korea in overall Bangladesh's export to 42 countries. In terms of Bangladesh's imports from China, the Chinese portion has been increased from 17.6% 10 years ago up to 24% now. And in case of Korea, the portion was 3.3% 10 years back, but now after 10 years, it decreased to 2.1%. And if you compare this figure with other surrounding countries, it might give us some idea about the potential of our future relations. As you see, in terms of population, GDP, and GDP per capita, Bangladesh is somewhat ahead of other regional countries. And in case of Korea's export to these surrounding countries, to Bangladesh is $1.2 billion. If we compare it with India, more than 10 times of export Korea is doing into India. It's $150 $15 billion. But it will be very interesting if you compare this figure with Vietnam. Korea's export to Vietnam is $48 billion US. This is more than triple, 3 times more than Korea's export to India. And if you compare with Bangladesh, it's more than 30 times that Korea is exporting to Vietnam. But as you see, Vietnam, in terms of population, in terms of GDP, is lower than Bangladesh. So this figure might give some insight to both Korea and Bangladesh people about the potential that we have for the future of our trade or economic and investment relations. And another important area of our economic ties with Bangladesh is Bangladesh's expatriate workers in Korea. It was mentioned by Dr. Khan, but anyway, currently our official number of Bangladesh expatriate workers is around 15,000. But unofficial figure is around 20,000. So altogether, there are 20,000 Bangladesh expatriate workers in Korea. But if you see the remittance they are sending back home was over $200 million last fiscal year. And this figure makes Korea number 13 among all the countries Bangladesh is sending its workers. It was 12th, Korea was 12th the main remittance sending country in 2019 and 20 fiscal year. So, the number of the expatriate workers in Korea is not that many as workers in Middle East or European countries or in other East Asian countries. But the money, the amount of money they are sending back home is much larger than those countries in terms of the number of the workers. And this photo on the left side is very interesting photo of 1970s when Korea sent our construction workers to Middle East. There were hundreds and thousands of Korean construction workers were sent to Middle East in late 60s and 70s up to early 80s. And the money they earned from the Middle East construction sites and sent at home was very important sources of Korea's economic development. So this is some kind of similarity of our economic development for those countries. And now I would like to talk about this infrastructure area. And infrastructure has been an important area of our economic cooperation between Korea and Bangladesh. And according to our data, more than 100 Korean companies participated in over 200 infrastructure projects in Bangladesh for the past 5 decades. And even when Bangladesh declared independence in 1971, I found that there was a Korean company which was building a highway between Dhaka and Chattogram at the time. So Korean construction company was present in Bangladesh as early as its independence. And the Korean companies participating in Bangladesh infrastructure projects are mostly major global companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, POSCO, and Talla. And if you see these Korean companies in R&D sector, besides Yongwon Corporation, R&D investors are mainly small and medium-sized companies. But in case of infrastructure projects that Korean companies are participating, these are all major global companies. And currently, Samsung construction, Samsung CNT is constructing the third terminal of Dhaka International Airport and also Meghnagat multiplex power plants. And the most well-known projects by Korean company involved in infrastructure project is Jamuna Multi-Purpose Bridge, built by Hyundai Construction in 1998. And this story was I also often hear from my Bangladesh colleagues. And many Bangladesh colleagues told me about this story that, that bridge was the first bridge Bangladesh built across the major rivers. And this bridge at that time was the 11th longest in the world and the longest in Asian continent. So Bangladesh people were very proud of having this landmark bridge at the time. And they were very proud that this the bridge was built by a Korean company and very successfully built by the Hyundai company. So this is another success story of our bilateral collaboration. We have a success story in R&D sector, and also we had already a very important success story in the infrastructure area as well. And this this logo, this place, I put on here yesterday, just a dream. Today, a glorious reality. Can you imagine? Can you guess what this phrase was and meant? This phrase was related to the construction of Jamuna Bridge, and it was, in the placard in front of the construction site of Jamuna Bridge at the time, and the workers coming to the site, they saw and they read this phrase every day, and this phrase gave very strong encouragement and pride to the workers, coming to the site every day. So I think this is a phrase that Bangladesh is or can be so proud. That was already around 20 or more than 20 years ago. Then if you see the progress of Bangladesh over the past 20 years, it was not a dream that Bangladesh achieved this dream and made it a reality. And this was a phrase shared among the workers at Jamuna Bridge construction sites. And as we found, the infrastructure is one promising area of collaboration between our two countries, and also in order to strengthen cooperation in this field between our two governments. We launched the PPP platform between our government in 2019, and through 3 rounds of joint PPP platform meetings for the past 2 years, 5 candidate projects has been so far identified to be implemented under this scheme. And I will not share the details of the 5 candidate projects, but there are active collaboration and discussions between our government to strengthen our collaboration in this infrastructure field. And next, I would like to speak about the partnership between Korea and Bangladesh companies. And this partnership between Korea and Bangladesh companies is becoming more and more active in recent years. And most of all, I'd like to share with you that the very existence of KBCCI, Korea Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which was formed in 2013, and this organization is playing an important role in connecting and also facilitating among Korea and Bangladeshi companies. And now, with more than 100 Bangladesh and Korean companies mainly based in Bangladesh, as its member, the KBCCI is regularly organizing a trade mission to Korea, what they call Showcase Bangladesh, and also they are receiving Korean business delegation in Dhaka, what they call Showcase Korea. So the current president of the KBCCI is Mr. Mustafa Kamal of Magna Group of Industry. And this Mr. Mustafa Kamal is also the honorary consul of Korea in this country. So KBCCI is also very important linkage between our two business sectors. And most recently, this KBCCI, together with Chicago Chamber of Commerce and Industry, hold the round business table meeting in Jakarta, which was participated by many companies of those countries and also draw very high attention. And another story I'd like to share with you is also partnership between Bangladesh company and major Korean companies. And it is somewhat recent development that big Korean global companies such as Samsung and Hyundai are actively partnering with Bangladesh companies. And especially Samsung Electronics case, they opened its branch in Dhaka in 2009. And in partnering with the local company like Phil Electronics and Transcom. It started assembling and producing television, washing machines, and refrigerators and smartphones from 2013. And also many not know about this, but it's very important to know that Samsung Electronics also established the R&D Institute, R&D Center called SRDB, Samsung R&D Bangladesh, in downtown Dhaka in 2010. And they are developing softwares for Samsung's gadgets, which are used not only in this country, but around the world. And they are employing around 500 Bangladesh engineers and software development developers and experts. And Samsung is very satisfied about the quality of the workers of Bangladesh, not only in this R&D center, but also at the Samsung factory, run by Phil Electronics. I visited this factory a few months ago, but according to the Samsung people, the quality and the level of Bangladesh factory here is so satisfactory and so high level, so that they could assemble almost all the models they are producing around the world. And in case of the mobile phones, the latest model of mobile phone, like this fold-up phone, is produced by only 4 factories around the world. And Bangladesh is among the 4 factories they are producing these fold-up phones. And that is why the reason why is that the level of Bangladesh technicians and workers is very high level and competitive level. And this might be somewhat encouraging sign for progressing our future relations. And in case of Hyundai Motors also, they decide to assemble the automobiles here in this country. And with the Fair Group, they are building a factory, assembly factory in Gazipur, Bangladesh, Hyderabad. And they might start assembling the Hyundai cars from early next year. So this partnership with local Bangladesh companies, especially by the big global Korean companies, is a recent phenomenon, and that is showing us for the future relations between our 2 countries. And I do believe that more and more major Korean companies might come here and might have increasing interest in doing this with Bangladesh. And now I would like to speak just a little bit about our collaboration in development assistance. Bangladesh is one of Korea's major development partners. And Bangladesh is the 3rd largest recipient of Korea's official development assistance. And in terms of soft loan, what we call EDCF, Economic Development Cooperation Fund, Bangladesh is the 2nd major recipient of this loan. And up to now, Korea provided $1.2 billion of EDCF loans to Bangladesh with around 24 projects. An interesting thing is that the interest rate of this loan is very low. It's less than 0.05%, with 40 years of repayment period, including 15 years of grace period. And just 2 weeks ago, one EBC framework agreement to provide Bangladesh up to $700 million between 2021 and 2025 was signed. Even last year during the pandemic time, Korea provided $50 million in cash to support Bangladesh's fighting against the consequences of the pandemic. And And this shows, our interest and our willingness to closely work together with Bangladesh people and government. And in terms of the grant assistance, most of the grant assistance are gone through KOICA, Korea International Cooperation Agency, which is our development agency under the Korean Foreign Ministry. And up to now, KOICA provided $164 million with 35 projects in this country. And for KOICA, Bangladesh is the 13th major recipient of KOICA's grant aid. And a number of areas they are supporting, and health, ICT, education, and environment, and also humanitarian assistance as well. And then in our development assistance, there are roughly three major areas where we put high priority. First priority might be the health sector. Already in 1998, we established Bangladesh Korea Friendship Hospital in Sabah. And that is providing this good medical services to the local people, especially the workers at Sabah EPZ. And this year, we added the eye care unit, eye care department to this hospital. And also we are dispatching 2 Korean doctors to this hospital, and also regularly providing equipment for the operation of this hospital. And in 2018, also we established in Dhaka what we call Itinerary, National Institute of Advanced Nursing Education and Research. And this institute is educating and training nursing leaders, so that these nursing leaders can also train and develop the nurses necessary for medical facilities around the country. And now one of the biggest development projects undergoing is DSMU, Super Specialized Hospital. We are building this big hospital right next to DSMU, and through EDCF fund and total fund, we are contributing to this project is $230 million, and it will be inaugurated only next year. And not only the building, Korea will provide top level of medical equipment to this hospital, and also provide quite significant training and education programs for the managers and also for the medical workers to be under employment by this hospital. And this is it. And also education and training, vocational training is one of the areas we are putting priority. Already there are 3 vocational centers established by Korea's assistance, one in Dhaka, one in Chattogram, and most recently in Rajshahi, also we established another vocational training center. And ICT, there are a number of programs going on between the 2 governments. Most notably and most recently, Korea, together with Bangladesh government, established an e-government master plan for digital Bangladesh. So this was finalized August 2019, and now, according to this master plan, many projects are going on in cooperation between the 2 governments and also under the unilateral initiative of Bangladesh government. There are a number of projects, but I will not go in detail on this ICT areas. And maybe this might be the last element I will share with you about this cultural collaboration between our 2 countries. As already mentioned by Dr. Khan, there is a kind of question of boom of Korean culture in this country, especially among youngsters. starting from K-pop especially, through the K-dramas and K-beauty, K-cosmetics, and these days K-films. And also in that regard, also there are increasing demand on learning Korean language by many Bangladesh people. Young people wants to learn Korean language to enjoy K-pop or K-drama or K-films. But also many potential Bangladesh digital workers who wants to go to Korea and they want to learn Korean language. So that we are offering some Korean learning opportunities, and in Dhaka University we established Korean language course, and annually or somewhat regularly we are holding Korea speech contest, and this is a very popular and very competitive contest. Both Korea and Bangladesh people are enjoying. And as there are increasing demand on Korean culture, I would like to make some strengthen the effort to bring more and more cultural programs and opportunities to this country. And for your information, my embassy is organizing a Korea Film and Tourism Festival from 21st to 26th of this month in National Museum of Bangladesh. So during the pandemic time, we could not organize offline concert or offline programs, but this is first time we are organizing offline after or during the pandemic. So anyone is welcome to join this film festival this month. And last thing I would like to share with you about the Korea Corner at the Dhaka University, at the National at the Central Library of Dhaka University. We established Korea Corner in 2013, and we are providing some, not only these books or written materials, but also audiovisual materials regarding Korea or Korea-Bangladesh relations, both in English and Korean, and also if there is, even in Bangla language, we are providing these materials. And on the right is photo of Korea Corner at the National Museum of Bangladesh. We established this Korea Corner as early as 2004, and there are only 4 countries at the National Museum that have its individual country corner: Korea, China, Iran, and Switzerland are 4 countries which have country corner at the National Museum. And this is quite sizable, not that big, but very but relatively sizable, and you can understand and enjoy this Korean culture, especially from history and the cultural aspects. And also, I'd like to recommend you, if you or your colleagues at any time, to make a visit to this museum. So this might be the end of my presentation, and I will only propose 3 themes including my presentation for something that think of for our deliberation today, and also for our deliberation for the future of our relations. For me, upon my arrival, I presented 3 themes in developing the relations between Korea and Bangladesh. First, elevation. Second, diversification. And third, generation. Elevation. So everybody knows that we need to make our already close, strong relations into new level, new heights. That should be the goal of our future collaboration. And diversification, again, as was mentioned, up to now, the RMG sector occupies the largest portion of our collaboration from the beginning and up to present. So going beyond the RMG into other areas such as ICT, health, or infrastructure, or even agriculture, or the pharmaceutical variable. And we need to move beyond RMT and diversify the collaboration between our two countries. And generation is about this country. Bangladesh is a young country. More than 70% of the population is under age 35. This, as young people are majority of Bangladesh, and naturally and obviously we have to focus in our collaboration on these young people and young generation who are the one who owns the future of this country and also of our relations. So with that, I'd like to finish my presentation, and I look forward to some active interactions among the participants. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was indeed a master course and a lecture on the totality, the entire spectrum of, I think, Korea-Bangladesh relations. You covered very well in the space of 35, 40 minutes. Pictures tell a story so much better, don't they? I mean, than words. You've done that. I want to commend you and your team for this immense research that you must have done to make this presentation possible. And we have profited enormously from it. So thank you, Ambassador. What I'll do is, after all the discussants have spoken, there will probably be time enough for me to give you the floor just for a few minutes to react to any points that they may have raised and you might wish to add to your initial remarks. I have now much pleasure in recognizing Professor Devapriyo Bhattacharya. He's the Distinguished Fellow of the Center for Policy Dialogue, an economist of prodigious fame and a trade negotiator, ambassador, WTO, and a very esteemed colleague. Devapriyo.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair, for giving that generous introduction. It's a pleasure once again to be back at the Cosmos Dialogue and to see all these eminent people in these small boxes in my small screen. I pay my respect to all of them, and particularly to my good friend Inayatullah Khan for organizing this series and making it a habit for all of us to get an exposure to the bilateral relations through the very erudite presentations of the ambassadors. Ambassador Lee essentially provided us an historical retrospect. He has taken us through the economic cooperation evolution, the partnership, and going from macro to micro and sectoral information in great details. He has also took us to the future, and I greatly appreciated his triangulation of elevation, diversification, and generation. And I must say he didn't miss out on any issues. The only thing I can think of is how popular had been the K-drama on the televisions in Bangladesh, and also how popular is the Korean cuisine, starting from kimchi to bulgogi over here. So I think it's an excellent basis for have a bit more reflections on these things. I will stay away from citing figures because Ambassador Lee has given us enough numbers already, because it was very empirically rich and analytically robust and very insightful with his own thoughts. So as you know, I follow my grandmother's principle that don't say more than 3 points. So what would be my 3 points today? My first point is the past, and the second will be the present, and the third will be the future. On the past, I think what remains to be learned always from Korea is how to conduct your development policy or macroeconomic policy. The miracle of the Han River, as has been usually mentioned, is that when you go back in the 1947 or 50s, when South Asia had a per capita income more than Korea, and by the 50s, when the per capita income was $90, Korea surpassed South Asia. And after 5 decades, now the Korean per capita income is 15 times more than South Asia. So, it's a spectacular economic wonder. The most important part of this wonder story is that it did not follow the World Bank IMF textbook case. When the World Bank IMF really argued for an stabilization and a macroeconomic equality and neutrality, South Korea pursued what we call in the economic literature is economic discrimination. So they supported the export-oriented industry tremendously with their exchange rate, with their fiscal policy, and with all full government regulation of the private sector. I think what happened as a result is very well known. What is to be seen, how they made the transition from the export-oriented industry to HCI, the high chemical industrialization process. And finally, if you look at the Asian crisis, the way South Korea really fended off this Asian crisis is a thing to be learned for all developing countries whenever they feel the external vulnerability or shocks. So having said that, let me also put on record that quite often the South Korean experience is often misunderstood or misinterpreted in the context of the developing countries. And it is being argued that you need an authoritarian government in order to pursue that kind of economic policy or economic success. It cannot be further from the truth. It is true that the growth process did couple with a certain type of government process, but South Korea is also a tremendous example in how you move from economic discrimination, authoritarian policy to democratic context with much more egalitarian economy. South Korea today stands one of the most egalitarian economy, with its inequality being quite moderate and much comparable positively with other OECD countries. So those who want to look at the South Korean experience would have to also look at how South Korea has established its rule of law, bringing their topmost people under surveillance and also putting them on the dock in that way. We have a lot to learn from South Asia, both in terms of its economic development, as well as how it conducts its democratic polity, giving rights to their workers, trade unions, civil society, and others. So I remain quite committed on that. The last point on that, the South Korean experience is also those who know about the Samuel Udong, the self-help community a development process of South Korea, which has some resonance with the past of our country of self-help and community cohesion. I think we still need that when we talk about SDG, where no one can be left behind, and the community level discussions is very, very critical. That was the past. To learn about South Korea, and South Korea continues to, enamor us with its success as it goes. Regarding the present, I think the ambassador has given us a fantastic overview on that. In fact, not only overview, a penetrating exposure of the various elements of the cooperation, what is going on. Coming on the trade, let me be more reflective, less on empirical. Coming to the trade, we are exporting $350 million and importing more than $1 billion from South Korea. So obviously, we have a lot to do in terms of improving our exports. And if you look at the exports are happening when South Korea has given us a duty-free, quota-free market access for so many years by now. So it is a matter of great, I think, anguish for me as an economist to see that even after duty-free, quota-free market access, we could not really take full advantage of the South Korean market and diversify our products beyond garments and leather. Of course, my good friend, Dr. Rubana, will be speaking about the RMG challenges, but let me talk about the non-RMG part of it. So how do you really penetrate into the non-RMG part? And Mr. Kihak Sung will be diversifying into non-RMG sector Sunday. I am really waiting for that. This is one. The number two is that FDI. I think FDI, if you look at the FDI and the more than $1 billion stock of Korean investment now over here, it is good that we see that the Korean investment is also diversifying, going into non-garments areas, going into ITs and technological upgradation and all other issues. That is very, very fantastic. But still, $1 billion stock plus is very, very minimal in many ways. I say this with my tongue in the cheek because I know the hardship with the Korean EPZ faced over the years, how they have been harassed and really got into that. I don't know what is the current status of it, but I hope and pray that the positive frame of mind what Korea maintained during this whole process is very, very admirable. And so I hope the FDI process will further get momentum. Coming on the remittances, you see in the recent past, Korea had been one of the incremental sources of remittances beyond our traditional sources, beyond Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Emirates, and others. And if you look at the pandemic time, I think it is a significant portion of the incremental remittances came from Korea last year. It speaks about the new potential over there. My only point to it is that as we move into the new market, we will need new skills. It is not the traditional underskilled or semi-skilled people which go to the Middle East will work in South Korea. We will need a much more skilled people to be working there, and we need to prepare for that for the new markets over there. We quite often use our the soft policies in terms of giving premium to exchange rates and etc. And to get the remittances flow up. But what we do not do is that look at the structural problems, the real problems, why our remittances are not being able to take a big jump and be sustainable in this case. Regarding the ODA, I think that regarding ODA, it has been mentioned that Bangladesh remains on the third priority country in the COICA's list. We see most $100 million coming on every year. 70% of them are going to health, education, and other structural transformative activities. It's a great thing for us to get that. What we need to know is that how do we package this ODA flow with the LDC transition which is coming up. One, of course, is that we would seek duty-free, quota-free market access beyond 2026, and so it continues. It would be a great gesture on the part of the Korean government to accord that to Bangladesh and to solidify our partnership. But at the same time, I would think that there may be much more selective and supportive international support measures for the diversification agenda, which the ambassador has rightly mentioned, that we link it up with our LDC strategy over there. To conclude on my third point, the future. Quite often, when we discuss the conversations and our speeches from our honorable ambassadors in Dhaka, we quite often narrow it down to our bilateral relationship. What we quite often do not appreciate that in this modern globalized world, the relationship, what happens here is not necessarily what happens here. It happens as a result of many other things which happens elsewhere in the world, particularly when geopolitically Bangladesh has become such an attractive, is attracting attention globally in that. I won't go into other issues because there are my international, the ambassadors are here. Ambassador Iftekhar Karim is here. I see Shaukat Munir is here. And others, they will talk about these things. Let me just emphasize only one issue where South Korea had been the leader. It is the leadership in the international cooperation governance. If you go back in 2005, when the Paris Principles of Aid Effectiveness were signed, it was South Korea which took up the mantle and took it forward to the Busan in 2008. The Busan has now become synonymous with the democratization of the international cooperation relationship. And since then, it is South Korea which has been promoting the principles of ownership in the international cooperation, the harmonization with the national organizations. It's about the alignment with our national development aspirations. It's a partnership and no less the results-based management system. I think South Korea is at this moment the leadership role which has been ascribed to it. I think the leadership role has further been strengthened as South Korea fits its, I think, gravitas as a middle power. And if you look at the recent initiative of MICTA, that the Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, and Australia, MICTA is at this moment possibly redefining the global international relationship in many ways with its soft power than many of the big countries from Europe or United States in North America. So in the future, I see South Korea's will turn out to be possibly one of the most steadfast and possibly the most substantive and possibly the most effective partners in our development transition in the future. I really take this opportunity to compliment Ambassador Lee. I am really looking forward to my visit to Seoul next week to discuss many of these issues. I greatly appreciate the special privilege of getting invited by the Foreign Ministry of Korea. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me this floor.
Thank you very much, Devapriya. I mean, you have actually, this has been a very, very significant input, very reflective. You have touched upon the essence of the relationship and in many ways and sought to set it on a global milieu, which will, I'm sure, be picked up by other discussants in the course of the afternoon. I have now much pleasure in giving the floor to Mr. Ki Hak-sung, Chairman of Yangon, Chairman and CEO, and a longtime friend of Bangladesh, and as I have said, someone that I have known and admired from a distance for a long, long time. Mr. Ki Hak-sung.
Assalamu alaikum. I was very delighted to be invited by Anayat Khan. This also more delighted to find all the members of discussions. And also I'm learning a lot from Bangladesh-Korean relationship by Ambassador Lee's presentation. In fact, since we started May of 1980, it's the 41st year, 41 year full, we were operating in Bangladesh, and there was lots of joys and lots of struggle, of course. But the other day we have tallied what is our investment in Bangladesh, that we find is $600 million because we have reinvested continuously. So maybe Korean investment figure should be adjusted accordingly. On the other hand, that I just thought that how we can improve our export from Bangladesh to Korea, since we have struggled to give this duty-free import to Korea some years back. We really worked very hard to do it as quickly as possible. And I think we can account for soon, maybe 5-6 years time, to export from Bangladesh these textile goods, mostly garments, $1.4 to $1.5 billion, which is a new market for you, relatively. At this moment, we are importing about $140 million, which is a meager sum, which about 20% of them are Yongwon imports, actually. Yeah. Then I think going forward, Bangladesh needs to really make a lot of effort to make a FTA agreement with the many exporting countries, so that these low-hanging fruit of textile and clothing business should be harvested properly before jumping into new fruit. Of course, planting new tree, we need to do that, but textile and clothing business is a low-hanging fruit. We need to harvest as much as possible going forward. In the meantime, I want to show what Yongwon has been doing in terms of ESG, topics. Please excuse me for
okay.
About
Go ahead.
8
You're going to show
minutes
some slides,
video here. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
For over 40 years, Yongwon Corporation has been a proud part of Bangladesh's industrial.
저 사진은 나오게 할 수 없나? 됐다.
Throughout this time, our approach to business has always tightly integrated with our holistic commitment to CSR.
So I think we cannot hear the sound.
Sorry, we can't hear anything.
5 million trees, of which some.
Can you hear?
No. Is there someone speaking?
The sound is quite low.
Sound rolling on.
I think pictures is speak enough.
The International Union on Conservation of Nature, IUCN, World, the World Bank.
Do you hear now?
Yes.
Can it be improved? If it can't be improved, all right.
I
go
think
ahead.
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Within KBZ to ensure the availability of fresh water. To date, 25 lakes and water bodies have been created. 500 million gallons of rainwater each year. Elsewhere in Chattogram, heavy industry has caused the groundwater to reduce by 20 meters in 40 years. However, the groundwater level around KBZ has increased thanks to KBZ's rainwater harvesting. This enrichment of the underground aquifer has helped surrounding villages meet their water needs. The lakes also attract a huge number of migratory birds every year, and 137 species of birds have consequently settled in the area. The incredible biodiversity of the zone has been recognized by Chattogram University's Department of Botany, which has identified over 400 species of plant life in this zone. To meet its growing energy demands in an environmentally sustainable manner, Yangwon has undertaken a massive 40 megawatt solar power project. This will see state-of-the-art solar panels cover the roofs of every single industrial building throughout the zone. Yangwon's factories are equipped with wastewater treatment plants and effluent treatment plants. These measures were highly commended by two former presidents of the World Bank during their visit to Yangwon factories in Dhaka and Chattogram. Yangwon has made available considerable funding for the conservation of Royal Bengal tigers in the Sundarbans, and its president, Ray Yoon-sung, is a board member of WWF Korea. Yangwon is a pioneer in female employment in Bangladesh, and currently over 75% of its workforce are female. It is also constructing 9 purpose-built dormitories for female workers. Once complete, these dormitories will house over 5,400 female workers. Female factory workers with children are also encouraged to use the company's child care centers to look after the children during working hours. Yangwon has also sponsored higher education for its female workers at the Asian University for Women. Outside its factories, Yangwon has supported the empowerment of females in different ways. Yangwon constructed a number of student dormitories in Mymensingh to enable underprivileged girls from Garo communities to pursue higher education. To stem the dropout of female students due to a lack of female toilets, Yangwon has funded the construction of 40 toilets in 20 schools and colleges in Islampur and Jamalpur. At its factories, Yangwon provides subsidized meals to all its workers at a cost of only 2 taka. Full-time nutritionists are also engaged to ensure the nutrition and health of the meal. Workers are given free medical services, including free medicines under qualified doctors and nurses. Yangwon also provides a national and international air ambulance service in cases of serious illness or injury. In 1999, Yangwon also introduced the concept of independent female counselors to assist workers with personal and professional development. Flying academies abroad. Arirang Flying Academy has since been recognized as the best flight school in Bangladesh.
얘기를 안 하나?
Young One is proud to have contributed to the expansion of Prayash, a school specializing in autistic children, run under the patronage of the Bangladesh Army in Chattogram Cantonment. In over 25 countries, Young One has also donated more than 5 million pieces of winter clothing to the underprivileged. Young One funded and set up a complete computerized lab, the first of its kind, in the Department of Graphics at Dhaka University's Faculty of Fine Arts to harness the creativity of a generation of students. It is a point of pride for Young One that their offices around the world are adorned with Bangladeshi art. Over the decades, it's purchased hundreds of paintings by Bangladeshi artists and has sponsored exhibitions to promote Bangladeshi art. This commitment to arts and culture is best illustrated by the recently completed multi-million-dollar restoration of the famed heritage site Boroshartar Bari in the historic ancient city of Shonarka. The brainchild of Young One's chairman, Ki Hak Sung, the project was fully financed and executed by Young One. The restored site was recently inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and has been handed back to the government of Bangladesh's Ministry of Cultural Affairs to be experienced by visitors from generations to come. The combination of Young One's commitment to people, its commitment to the planet, and its commitment to art and culture together show the depth of Young One's commitment to CSR and Young One's enduring commitment to Bangladesh.
Thank you very much for enduring these slightly long videos here. Thank you. That's end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kihad-san. Yes, that was very interesting and, very well put together. Congratulations on all your activities. And once again, thank you for participation. I will now call upon Dr. Rubana Haq. She doesn't need an introduction to anyone else except for some people from the other planet, any other planet. Entrepreneur, Chairman Muhammadi Group, and former president, as you all know, of the PGMEA. Dr. Haq, you have the floor.
Thank you, once again, for a very generous introduction. Thank you, Cosmos, for inviting me to this august gathering. And of course, Ambassador Lee has covered everything, literally, a 360-degree of Bangladesh-Korea cooperation. And of course, Mr. Ki Hak Sung, who I consider my mentor and somebody I look up to very much, he is not only a Korean, he's a proper Bangladeshi. I think he's a better ambassador of Bangladesh than many of us. So it's a pleasure being in this gathering. I just would want to quickly add to Ambassador Lee that Ambassador Lee probably, you are also encouraging young startups from Bangladesh. So I was just a part of Koreathon, so Ideathon contest, which was basically managed by Koreans and also the ICT ministry. And that went off very well because we sent a lot of startups to Korea. So that says a lot about where you are taking your idea of generation. So your idea of generation, of course, applies to the youth, the young. The elevation part, let me just come to it quickly, because as you all know that Bangladesh does supply around $323 million worth of garments to Korea, whereas Korea buys $9 billion from other countries. We must also see that what are we supplying to Korea? So if you look at the figures, we're actually supplying around $83 million of just basic t-shirts, which doesn't make sense. We are supplying, whereas, Korea buys around $537 million of just man-made fiber-based non-cotton anoraks. We're only supplying 17 million. So there's a mismatch between what we supply and what Korea buys. We don't want to be just selling you $70 million of sweaters that we do currently, and just $15 million worth of shirts and blouses. $76 million of trousers. We need to crack your better market. So we need your support in value-added products. So Korea, being in Korea, we now look towards Korea for fashion. Our kids love Korean fashion. It's just not your movie Parasite that gets us hooked to the screen. It's also way beyond that. It's just not K-pop. I mean, my physiotherapist's daughter is now speaking in Korean because she's looking at Korean series every day. So it's interesting to see how art and aesthetics overlap trade. You know, as Chairman Kyak-sang said about art, I mean, it's amazing how he has himself promoted a few of our brilliant artists, including Kalidas. And Cosmos had very, very generously organized a memorial for Kalidas just the other day. So, you know, we are grateful to Korea for their all-around support, but we also must realize that over the last 10 years, our bilateral trade has actually jumped for about 4.03%. So that goes to say that, you know, we are doing better with Korea. We would just like to do more. What are the other things that we can do more? Number one, Bangladesh lacks fashion. So if we could have a collaborative council of Korean designers and Bangladeshi exporters so that we can basically upgrade our product and sell you a better product, that should be our target. So if we can have some fashion and R&D support in design, that would be great. Because you've given us so much, might as well give us one more help to another notch to take us to the next level of fashion. The other thing is, you know, we're talking about 4IR and we're talking about the challenges. You know, it's probably time that we look towards you for technology. And your technology transfer would mean a lot to us because, you know, we can, in terms of fashion and innovation, you could probably help Bangladesh adapt an end-to-end digital workflow. So that's another area that you can help us with. We talk about 3D printing. You know, if we could just print our all our equipments, not even equipments, our spare parts, even that would help. So Korean collaboration in technology and innovation would be greatly appreciated by Bangladesh. That's one. And I also think, you know, while we very fiercely protect our R&D sector, of course, we need to diversify. You know, light engineering is one thing that we would all like to go into because the overdependence on R&D has to end. And if we have to do that, then we need your support as well. And while you talk about Samsung and others, I think the Korean Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce, if they could have a regular interaction between Bangladeshi entrepreneurs and your MNEs, then, you know, we would benefit a lot because a B2B would be the best way to go forward. And a regular interaction of B2Bs would be the best. So, you know, many of us are interested to go into the next level of light engineering and others. Maybe you can help us there. My last point, my last appeal to you all would be to look at a virtual marketplace for Bangladesh. So you see, now we have Alibaba, we have Amazon, but where is the Alibaba and Amazon of Bangladesh? I mean, why is it only about B2B? Why can't we be B2C? And if we want to be B2C, we need your help because we can then design a full virtual marketplace and you can help us with the technical capacity building so that we can go to the next level. We've had extensive discussions with the Ministry of Finance about a virtual marketplace for Bangladesh. And what the ministry says is you go build your own platform and we will give you policy support. We need more than that. We just don't need policy support from the government. We also need friends all around the globe, especially Korea. If you could come forward and help us build this virtual marketplace, it would benefit the industry a lot. And it's just not about RMG. It can go way beyond RMG and more. I think I've spoken enough. Just that, you know, the last point on the virtual marketplace is very, very important for us because the online business in 2018 was around $533 billion, and it's expected to go up to $872 billion by 2023. Bangladesh should not miss out on this opportunity. And if Korea could extend a helping hand, especially while Korea concentrates on elevation, generation, and of course, diversification, then, we fit into your expectation totally. And I think your expectation grid will soon be translated to reality if we are all in it together. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Rubana. Thank you. That was really very good. I mean, you make the points very succinctly that the better is not good enough. I mean, a bit of Korean support with the transfer of technology will help Bangladesh crack the higher market, as you say, and we have to reach out also for the higher fruits. Particularly, I mean, the support in bringing the virtual market to fruition. I'm sure, I don't know what kind of support the government is giving you at this point in time, but this is something that we in the academia can help. In other words, energize and sort of, try to, as influencers, get our people to think in that kind of, that line. She sort of raised the level of thinking somewhat in some ways. Okay, I now have next on my list is Ambassador Iftikharul Karim, friend, colleague, former ambassador to Korea, Seoul, and I welcome him for the first time, I think, in Cosmos, but we shall be tapping on his intellectual resources more hence, but right now you have an opportunity for the next 10 minutes.
Dr. Iftikhar, it's been a pleasure to be a part of this discussion. And so I had actually prepared some written comments, a presentation not like Ambassador Lee, but or Mr. Kyak Sung, but so I will just begin to refer to this written document that I had prepared for this discussion. When you invited me to this discussion, to join this discussion on Bangladesh-Korea relations, I was surprised and hesitant as I considered myself outdated, having left Seoul 2 decades ago. I readily admit your persuasive insistence prevailed, and therefore before making my remarks, permit me to first thank you for this opportunity to share my views in this forum. I hope I have not become irrelevant. I'm delighted to meet for the first time His Excellency Ambassador Lee Jung-kyun of the Republic of Korea in Bangladesh and extend my personal greetings and welcome to him. I see that I am in the company of an old friend, Mr. Kyak Sung, who was the first Korean businessman I met in Seoul within days of my arrival there in March 2000. It is wonderful again to meet with Dr. Devopriyo and Mrs. Rubana Haq, and of course, Mr. Inayatullah Khan, all of whom I have known for many decades. Listening to all the previous speakers in this webinar, whose erudition and up-to-date knowledge of Bangladesh, Korea has been an enlightening experience, especially the very comprehensive video presentation by Ambassador Lee. I have learned more in these hours with you that would have been possible if I had spent years in academic interests since leaving Korea in June 2002. Prognosis, however, is a very loaded term because prediction, which is what it means, is a territory where even angels fear to tread. While none of us here today claim angelic descent or status, we could perhaps, as mere mortals, heed the warning. Be that as it may, there is nothing permanent in interstate relations, and therefore it is quite natural to indulge in some speculation about the future that is necessary. That is certainly the premise from which analysts and diplomats, whether erstwhile or serving, draw courage as to speculate. No prognosis can begin to take shape without review of the past. These are two sides of the same coin. Before I had the honor and privilege to serve as Bangladesh ambassador to the Republic of Korea at the beginning of the new century, that is the year 2000, and until leaving its shores in the middle of 2002, diplomatic relations between the two countries had already been in place for nearly 3 decades. Trust and mutual respect, and both being developing nations, became the foundation for a relationship that has blossomed since. There are similarities in our historical experiences, such as the destruction and the devastation of the Korean War and our own war of liberation, and the need to rebuild and renew national well-being that resonated with our two countries, making it much easier for us as professional diplomats to carry the nascent relationship between the two countries to what it is today. I like to think that I too had, like my predecessors and those who followed, contributed to our mutually beneficial relationship. When I arrived in Seoul in March 2000, I realized that my preconceived notions about the ancient hermit kingdom and modern South Korea were quite incompatible. Ancient traditions and customs lay at the heart of the Republic of Korea, even as it was being fast transformed into a 21st century industrial powerhouse. The tragedy of a divided society as represented by North and South Korea weighed heavily on the South Korean psyche, and President Kim Dae-jung's initiatives for reconciliation had raised hopes which had been dormant since 1953. The euphoria of seeming progress earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, and the joyous expectation of reunification of divided families was palpable. Alas, it was, and it still is, a dream unfulfilled. Only 2 years later, I visited Pyongyang from Beijing, where I was posted as ambassador of Bangladesh and accredited ambassador of Bangladesh to the DPRK. The contrast between the two Koreas couldn't have been more shocking and starker. It was then that the economic miracle of ROK could be fully understood and appreciated. That one society, divided 50 years ago, starting from the same base after 3 years of destructive modern war, while adopting different political ideologies and economic policies, could become so unequal in economic prosperity and personal freedom, and was unimaginable. One had to see it and experience it to believe. From my personal perspective, Bangladesh, Republic of Korea relations entered a new phase sometimes in the decades of the late 70s and early 80s of the last century, when private sector entrepreneurship and enterprise from both Bangladesh and Korea, in the form of training of garment workers from Bangladesh, Dash Garments, and establishing the first major garment manufacturing industry in Bangladesh by a South Korean entrepreneur, Young Won, pioneered the robust commercial and industrial exchange that has become the benchmark of what is possible between our two countries. Today, the RMG sector in Bangladesh is the backbone of our foreign exchange earnings and the second largest garment exporter in the world, PRC being number one. The first foreign export processing zone in Bangladesh was also the first major foreign investment in the country. The Korean export processing zone, as has been noted before already, was the brainchild of Mr. Kim Il-sung, and whose dogged persistence pioneered South Korean business interests in Bangladesh. While we in Bangladesh owe him a heartfelt thanks, South Korean trade and business growth would not have been possible without the support and cooperation of the People's Republic of Bangladesh as well as the Republic of Korea. During these last decades, interstate relations were cemented through bilateral diplomatic channels as well as cooperation in the international fora. During my tenure in Seoul, for the first time, defense purchases, frigates for the Navy, Bangladesh Navy, took place. Patrol boats for the newly formed Bangladesh Coast Guard were gifts from the ROK Navy. At the same time, COECA volunteers began to engage in Bangladesh. Streamlining and regulating undocumented illegal Bangladesh labor was successfully undertaken. The chaotic situation that had persisted for many years has since been replaced by a system of working permits ensuring protection from exploitation. These were followed in later years by major infrastructure project contracts awarded to Korean industry giants such as Hyundai, the East-West Power Interconnect over the Jamuna, and the Jamuna Bridge project, to name a few. Korea has become an attractive migrant labor destination for Bangladeshis, just as Korean construction companies in the Middle East began employing Bangladeshi labor in their contracted projects. South Korean industrial products and light machinery gained the confidence of Bangladeshi consumers for quality and reliability. The volume of trade and commerce, as has already been noted by Ambassador Lee in his video presentation, has grown exponentially. I cannot quote any recent data about this because it is nearly 2 decades since I left Korea. But as we heard from Ambassador Lee, and his very comprehensive video presentation, it is quite astonishing and impressive. As Korea progresses to become the third largest economy in the Pacific region after China and Japan, its trade and commercial footprint cannot be ignored. Already in Bangladesh, Samsung, LG, Hyundai are trusted household names, brands poised to seriously challenge European and Western consumer good manufacturers that have dominated our markets. Prognosis for the future, at least to my mind, therefore requires taking into consideration the past before venturing into predicting the future, which I noted earlier in my intervention is a very slippery slope. I believe, first and foremost, political relations must be nurtured and strengthened through regular, periodic, bilateral dialogue at the highest levels, emphasizing sovereignty, mutual respect, and cooperation at the bilateral, international, as well as regional level. Regular and periodic dialogue between the foreign ministries will enhance the quality of our relationship. Second, economic, trade, and commercial relations need to be given priority while taking into account the fragility of Bangladesh economy and its needs. Focusing on small and medium industrial and light engineering enterprises could be a priority consideration and should be promoted and protected as Bangladesh economy shifts to industrialization. The reputation of quality and reliability of small-scale Korean industrial manufacturing machinery will be an asset in that endeavor. As the RMG sector in Bangladesh economy matures, it may not experience the explosive growth it has enjoyed so far. Diversification of the Bangladesh economy to engage new sectors such as the ICT, where South Korea is already a giant, could become the engine of economic cooperation between us. Thirdly, there has to be conscious and deliberate policies to promote and strengthen interaction between trade bodies and entrepreneurs for mutual confidence building and seamless sharing of information. Fourthly, practical measures to build confidence building in financial institutions and practices. Reduce bureaucratic intervention and red tape to facilitate trade and commerce with attention to tariff and non-tariff barriers. The future trajectory of ROK relations has immense potential. And if our political leadership sees fit, they can together take this already established friendship to an entirely different and higher plane that will make the past 50 years, impressive as it is, look like a pale shadow. Thank you for your attention and patience.
Thank you, Ambassador Karim. Building a bilateral relationship between Bangladesh and Korea is like building a Gothic cathedral. I mean, it forever goes on and is never quite finished. But you have been responsible also for laying some of those bricks in that foundation. And the invitation accorded to you was a recognition of that contribution you made to the bilateral relations. So that is why you are here, and we were sort of vindicated by your excellent remarks. I have now much pleasure in calling upon the last but not least of our speakers, Mr. Shafkat Munir. He's a research fellow at BIPS. He's been a long-term researcher associated with Singapore, has worked closely with me in the past, and is also associated with the institute that I'm with, the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore. He's a strategist, and I assume that he will sort of take our discussions to where Devapriya had hinted that all these are built on a matrix, and the matrix would be the global, the regional, and the global milieu, and I would assume some of which remarks would also be addressed to that point. Shafkat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, for that very kind and generous introduction. I don't know if I can call myself a strategist, but I look at myself as an analyst. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your kind words. I want to turn our focus a bit away from the realm of trade and economics, which has dominated today's discussion. But at the outset, let me offer my personal thanks and gratitude to Cosmos Foundation, to Mr. Inayatullah Khan, to you, Chair Dr. Chaudhary, for inviting me here today to speak on this occasion. Cosmos Dialogue, I've always mentioned, has emerged as a key platform for intellectual discourse on foreign policy, on security issues, on trade, investment, and economics. And we really appreciate what the Cosmos Foundation is doing. It is my distinct honor to virtually meet His Excellency, the Ambassador of the ROK. Although my organization, we've had several contacts with the embassy, but we have not had the opportunity or the privilege to meet the ambassador yet, but I would hope to meet you in person in future. Now, coming back to the idea about ROK-Bangladesh relations and prognosis for the future. As we look towards the future and taking on from the spirit of what the ambassador said in terms of elevating and diversifying the relationship, I want to shift our focus to what we could potentially do in terms of security cooperation, greater cooperation on strategic and geopolitical issues, and also more specifically on defense cooperation. I completely endorse the statement by Dr. Devapriya Bhattacharya that bilateral relations are no longer confined to what happens between two capitals. It is essentially also a reflection of what happens in the region and what happens in the wider geopolitical space. In this context, I'm afraid I don't see a lot happening between Dhaka and Seoul at the moment, but there is a serious opportunity for us to do more. As we speak, the Chief of the Army Staff of Bangladesh Army, General Shafiuddin Ahmed, has just returned from a visit to the ROK, where he participated in a major defense exhibition. And although it has not been mentioned here, but I would like to bring this to the attention of the esteemed panel and the audience, that even at a time when Bangladesh had very little defense relations with other countries, I'm talking about the 70s and 80s, we had robust ties with the ROK armed forces. As early as the early 80s, Bangladeshi senior military leadership has visited the ROK. And as I was researching for these remarks, I came across a picture of General Atikur Rahman, who was the Chief of Army Staff between 1986 and 1990, visiting the ROK and receiving a major national award from the ROK. And if you look at his picture, he would always sport that particular medal. Similarly, successive chiefs of army staff have visited the ROK. Ambassador Dr. Chaudhary would recall that during his tenure in the caretaker government, General Moinu Ahmed had been to the ROK as well. And he was also awarded a similar decoration. So there is a strong foundation which is already there. And I hope it has been further cemented by the visit of General Shafiuddin Ahmed. The Republic of Korea is a significant geopolitical player in the international scene, not only in terms of East Asian security, but in terms of global security, it is a significant player. So what we in the strategic community in Bangladesh, and I have been in conversation with Ambassador Lee's colleagues at the ROK Embassy in Dhaka, what we would really like to see is greater discussion between Dhaka and Seoul on issues affecting East Asia, issues affecting wider Asian security, and particularly issues affecting the concept of the area of Indo-Pacific, and identify areas where we could jointly work together. The ROK has a very vibrant strategic community. I have personally had the privilege to work with many of the Seoul-based think tanks, such as Korean Institute for Defense Analysis, the Asan Institute, and many others. And we would really like to see greater interaction between the think tanks in Dhaka and think tanks in Seoul, so that we have a better mind meld in terms of our understanding of geopolitics and security. In terms of defense relations, coming to the point that Ambassador Karim has rightly mentioned, that defense acquisition from the ROK has been going on for over 2 decades now. But there is an opportunity to perhaps enhance our training cooperation, because ROK military has some of the finest centers of excellence for military training and education. And as our military modernizes, as our Navy modernizes, there is much that we can learn from the Republic of Korea in terms of techniques, in terms of new methods, and in terms of also our understanding of new defense technology as well. The ROK's technological innovation has also transferred into the domain of defense and aerospace technology as well. And in terms of smart warfare, which is going to be the mantra in the coming days, and the inclusion of artificial intelligence in the military, I think there's scope for us to cooperate with the ROK in that regard as well. I recently had the privilege of speaking at the Seoul Defense Dialogue. I was invited by the Korean Ministry of National Defense, albeit virtually because of the pandemic, although I hope to be there next year in person. And my panel looked at the role of military in managing the security implications of climate change. Climate change has not been mentioned as of yet, or only tangentially in the presentation by Chairman of Yangwon Corporation. But I think in the area of climate change, particularly in the area of security implications of climate change, the ROK is already doing a lot. And my session was chaired by the Minister for Climate Change, who's also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she articulated the steps that the ROK has taken. And I came away quite heartened about, quite impressed with the strides that the ROK has made in that field. So as we look at a greater role for our military in countering the effects of climate change, security implications of climate change, also enhancing our role in humanitarian assistance and disaster recovery, or HADR, I think we can really cooperate with the ROK in that regard. The ROK is also an international leader in terms of cybersecurity. And we time and again now come across stories of Bangladesh's vulnerabilities in terms of cybersecurity. And as we get more interconnected, as we get more connected to the global digital space, our cybersecurity vulnerability will only increase. It goes without saying. So I think there's an opportunity for us to also cooperate with the ROK in that regard, and to learn from their expertise on cybersecurity, not only for cybersecurity in terms of in the military sense, but cybersecurity in the civilian space as well. But all this can be accomplished if we have a greater understanding of each other's security and strategic priorities. Forgive me for saying so, Your Excellency and other panelists. I do not see us collaborating or discussing about strategic and security issues at a level which we should have attained by now. We're doing an enormous amount of work in terms of trade, investment, economics, which are the engines of a nation. Absolutely, I respect that, appreciate that a lot. But Bangladesh has also matured quite a lot over the last 50 years. And I think there's a real opportunity for Dhaka and Seoul now to also converse, proffer ideas to each other about security and strategic issues. And I see this cooperation as a two-way traffic. Bangladesh has also got a lot of expertise to offer, for instance, in an area which I work quite closely on, countering violent extremism. And as all countries are now grappling with the challenge of violent extremism, in various forms and shades. There are also ideas and expertise that Bangladesh can provide the ROK in terms of enhancing your understanding and expertise in this area. So I don't want to take too much time because we want to have enough time for discussion and further deliberation, and there are other points that I'm sure the esteemed panelists would make. But I'll just close up by saying that we had achieved a lot in terms of our relationship in the realm of trade, investment, economics, culture. Culture is, of course, very important. And we would like to see greater people-to-people contact being enhanced between the two countries. But my humble submission to you, Ambassador, and to our panel for today is that what I would really like to see is greater cooperation, collaboration, and dialogue between Dhaka and Seoul on strategic and security issues, so that we have a greater understanding of each other's priorities, we have a greater understanding of each other's strengths, and we can really learn from each other. And before I close, I would also like to say that we would really appreciate your continued support in resolving the Rohingya refugee crisis. We really appreciate the support that you have provided us. But as the crisis has now entered almost into its 5th year, we would continue to seek your support, your help in the international arena in bringing this situation to a peaceful resolution. I thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor, and it's a wonderful pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Shafkat. You've brought a novel and new point to the table, which is very well received, of course. I recall myself attending a ASEAN defense ministerial conference in Seoul, but you're absolutely right that there has not been conversation across the spectrum of civil society and government on security defense issues, because these issues contribute to stability, and which is a sine qua non for development. And in fact, that is where how we also helps us to build the kind of bilateral relationship, if we have a relationship in contributing to creation of stability, which enables that kind of interaction to take place. So thank you very much. Okay, there is some time left for questions. I have here questions from the floor. Do we have anybody on the floor from questions or any comments? Masood, you?
Yes.
Okay, I recognize you, Deputy Managing Director of Cosmos. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iqbal, and good day. I'm Masood Khan. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Cosmos Group. I would like to thank you very much for a most informative talk. I have a question which is not directly related to the subject, but I believe is of interest to everyone here. Could you tell us a little bit about the relationship between the two Koreas and share your thoughts about the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shafkat, do you have a question?
I think Masood has raised a very important question. So I just want to make an addendum to that. I would also like to hear the ambassador's thoughts on how ROK looks at the current crisis between China and Taiwan, and because that is going to have a very significant impact on East Asian security. Thank you.
Okay. If there be no other queries, Ambassador, you have the next few minutes to respond to these questions and make any final remarks that you might wish to. Ambassador Lee, please go.
Okay, so I have to express my deep thanks to all the speakers for their contributions, and I was somewhat impressed by all about the depth of your knowledge about Korea-Bangladesh relations, and also sharing your personal interactions and experiences in the relations, and have to be benefited from your ideas, and also your ideas from your own experiences in developing my work for making our ties closer and deeper. And even though two questions addressed to me was not that I'm very prepared for coming to here. But for this Taiwan-China relations is somewhat sensitive issue in Northeast Asia. And we are having a very close relations with all the neighboring countries. All our neighboring countries are all big strategic powers, global powers. So maintaining with them good relations is utmost importance. And we place our Korea-Taiwan relations in that context. So in consideration of the evolving security situation in the region, but also in terms of our interactions and our long-time relations with these neighboring countries also important. So our basic policy is to uphold this one China policy, but also for the security and stability and peace of the region. And this peace and stability of the region is also closely related to the security on the Korean Peninsula as well, especially for resolving this long-standing issue with our North Korean compatriots. So I think that will be just a short reply to Korea's position regarding Taiwan and China relations. And by extension, regarding this current two Korea relations, especially during the current administration, we have made very strenuous efforts to change the situation of Korean Peninsula from a technically at war situation to the technically peaceful situation by resolving the impasse of nuclear issues. So the 3 rounds of the summit meeting between two Koreas gave us much hope for the future of our relations, because it was for the first time that two leaders met 3 times during their tenure. So even though nothing has been achieved yet, but this kind of interactions presented a great hope for the future of our two countries. So these 2 times of summit between North and the United States during Trump administration, even though it fell short of the agreement, especially in Hanoi, but we would like to keep the momentum created out of these 2 rounds of summits. And still, even though Korean current administration is approaching to the end of the term, but we are making a final efforts for the improvement of relations, especially by taking up the idea of have a declaration on the end of the Korean War, the termination of Korean War, and technically for the truce agreement, we are still under technically at war situation. But by declaring the termination of this war situation by the leaders and also by the leaders of the neighboring countries, that is what we are making our efforts. We are extending our offer of dialogue to North Korea for every field, for security dialogue, for humanitarian dialogue, for cultural, economic cooperation dialogue. Even we are extending our offer for COVID-related support, and also for our food assistance to North Korea directly, and also through international organizations such as WFP. So all in all, the South Korean government now is making every effort to improve the relations, not only bilaterally with North Korea, but also in close consultations and cooperation with all neighboring countries. And I stop here. And again, thank you.
Thank you very much for those responses. By the way, thank you, Ambassador, because from my perch in Singapore, we also follow these issues very closely. And as you know, when Singapore hosted the Trump joint meeting, we were very much a part of at least on the, we're able to watch the proceedings from the front row, so to say. So we are very interested in regional stability, and we believe that Korea has been playing a very positive role in all this, and Korea's bilateral relations with all these countries will also contribute to that stability. I will bring this has been an amazingly interesting discussion, a long one, albeit, but very interesting, very detailed, and but all good things must come to a close, and I have to bring it to an end, but not before making a couple of comments. I mean, if our discussions have reached a conclusion, it is that while the bilateral relations are excellent, there is also ample room and scope for much greater cooperation. As Bangladesh graduates from the LDC status, it will need to upgrade and widen its export market, and Korea can be a source of assistance for that. Korean technology can help Bangladesh leapfrog, I think, to higher slots in the supply chain, as if it were. I have no doubt that Bangladesh will continue to support Korea's efforts, as we all do, to bring up to bring greater stability, as I've just said, in the Korean Peninsula and also in the wider region. I want to thank you, Ambassador, for your excellent contribution today. All our Korean friends, Mr. Ki Ha-sung, and each and every discussant has made informed contribution to the deliberations, which will be compiled, which will be circulated as we will continue to play the role of a facilitator, Cosmos, for bringing the coordination of the public and private sectors in the relationships among the countries of the region, including certainly Korea. I want to thank Nahar Khan and her team for her relentless efforts, for their relentless efforts to make this event a success, and also the many unseen hands that have been with you, Nahar, and I'm aware of that, and thank you very much for it. So I will conclude the formal discussions now. I hand over the floor to Mr. Inayatullah Khan, Inayat, for your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Iftikhar Bhai. I think this session has been a very fascinating and very enlightening roundtable. I would like to thank our ambassador, the keynote speaker, Ambassador Lee, for a very remarkable presentation. You mentioned, and I saw it in your presentation, that you have Korean corners in medical institutions, in educational institutions, in museums. But I want to add that Korea has corner in each and every Bangladeshi's heart. There is a Korea corner. And I make a statement with a lot of emotion. And my innumerable visits to your country in the past 40 years, including my visit as a Korea Foundation guest, to my last visit before the pandemic started to attend the World Congress of News Agencies in Seoul, where we were invited by President Moon at the Blue Palace, the Blue House. And he, when I identified myself, he asked me, he gave me at least 30 seconds to interact. And I could imagine that Bangladesh was also in his radar. I think a lot of has been spoken, but few things which I have personally observed. Why Korea today is where it is today is because Korea is, I think they allocate highest percentage of their GDP for R&D. No other country in this world comes near to Korea. Number two, when it comes to rewarding the teachers, especially primary school teachers, Korea is number one. And you can imagine what kind of strategy they adopted, because our children is our future, and Korean decision makers made a very good decision by engaging and allocating the right resource. a lot of things have been mentioned in this presentation, in this event, and I think technology was mentioned many times. And I would like to relate to my personal story with Dr. Hyuk Choi, who was the Science and Technology Minister for in Park Chung-hee's government. He was a founder of KAIST, Korean Institute of Science and Technology. I was very fortunate to have a very personal and cordial relationship with him since in the middle of, I think, 86, 87. And I was able to invite him to Bangladesh as my personal guest. And he met at this time some important people. But I think what he wanted to convey to Bangladesh government fell on deaf ears. And but we continued our communication. He died. And when I was in Seoul as a guest of the Korea Foundation, I went to visit KAIST. And I learned to my surprise that there are 4 other institutions which are as big as KAIST. So again, I think Korea can help us in guiding us to sort of initiating some R&D organizations, as Dr. Rubana said, from fashion to food to digital space, or in many fields. I think we can collaborate together. I also have to make a very special mention of my friend Ki Hak-sung, who has not only created a world-class export processing zone, but he has turned that space into an oasis of nature conservation and biodiversity. Young One Corporation and the organization that I founded, Wild Team, we have been collaborating in a lot of nature conservation activities. And in art, I think we have attended his, many art camps in his export processing zone. I'd like to add to the spirit of Mr. Ki Hak-sung and Ambassador Lee again, and thank you to each and every discussant, including Nahar, for helping us to have this seamless, session. I think it was very, very well organized, and I'd like to thank her and her team for making this event a great success. I also want to record our sincerest thanks to our president of foundation, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, for his very competent conduct of this session. In conclusion, may I ask everybody to give a hand of applause for this very successful event. Thank you. And I wish everybody good health and all the best. And thank you again. Bye-bye.